Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Robertson. I'm VP of Sales at Canby. Canby are a proud sponsor of the 2021 Canadian Gaming Summit. We're very excited to be welcoming today's keynote session, the bet the leagues are making. On behalf of today's presenters and the entire team at Canby, please enjoy the session. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Nick, who's Chief Commercial Officer at PointsBet Canada, to lead through the conversation. Thanks so much.
It's awesome. Thank you, Sarah. There you go. I think we're all here. Fantastic. So welcome to the conversation, everyone. It's an exciting week up here with legislation, hopefully getting closer and closer to the finish line and past it. It's my great pleasure to moderate this panel with these three finer gentlemen than I. I'm going to do my very best to limit talking. As some of you know, I tend to talk a lot. So I will, I'm just going to jump right in here. I'll introduce you guys. I'll let you guys introduce yourself, actually. So Tyler, why don't you lead us out? Who are you?
Thanks, Nick. Tyler Mazaru, Chief Revenue and Marketing Officer at the Canadian Football League. And I'm excited to be here and joined by my colleagues in support of sports betting and certainly what's to come in the Canadian market.
There you go. Scott, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. I'm Scott Kaufman-Ross, Senior Vice President and Head of Gaming and New Business Ventures at the NBA. My group oversees all of our commercial efforts in sports betting, as well as setting our league-wide strategy on how to embrace the category. Happy to be with you guys as well.
Amazing. Keith, you are our anchor.
Thank you. Keith Wachtel with the National Hockey League. I'm the Chief Business Officer, and I'm happy to be here. And I do not know who will win the Stanley Cup, so don't ask that question.
There you go. I had to wear the hat in honor of my favorite team, and hey, the last standing Canadian team. So, I think on that, let's just jump right in, guys. I think with Bill C-218 getting closer, and I think we've all spent a couple days talking about it and hearing perspectives on it, I think it's really the appropriate time to get a sense of what the league's perspective is, and even your personal perspective on why you support, why you think the passing of C-218 and the legalization of single event sports betting in Canada could be such a positive thing. And I'd like to turn to the Canadian league representative first. So Tyler, why don't you lead us out with this question? Like, what's your perspective on C-218, both from the CFL's perspective and from your own?
Thanks, Nick. Well, I don't think it's complicated. I think it's time to bring sports betting into the light, out of the shadows, if I can quote our commissioner. Any time where you can regulate an environment is better than an unregulated environment. And I think we've seen for years our fans and sport fans around the world participating in sports betting. It's something they enjoy. It's an extension to our game. It's compelling for a large segment of our audience. And our goal as a league is to protect our teams, our players, our communities. And I think we, as a leader in Canada, a leader in the football business, we want to work closely with the provinces and the federal government and our partners at the NHL and the NBA and everyone in sport to make sure that we regulate this in an environment that keeps everyone honest and allows us to educate our fans in a meaningful way. And we take that seriously. And we want to thank Paul Burns and the team at the CGA and all of our friends across the country in sport who believe this is the right thing to do. And we're excited about next steps. And we're very confident this will get passed and we can get to work on making sure that we develop the right opportunities for our fans to bet in a safe and responsible way.
Yeah, Keith, from an NHL's perspective, I would imagine you echo a lot of the same things that Tyler has said. You've seen it direct as states have started legalizing down south and certain teams have activated sports betting partnerships. Is there any other, additional color that you can add to kind of how the NHL thinks about C218 in Canada?
Sure. Well, thank you. And yeah, Tyler hit on most of it. I'll add that, people forget, or whether they forget or not, that there is legalized sports betting in Canada right now. It's just parlay sports betting. It's betting on multiple games as opposed to individual games. So it's not as if this should really be that much of a stretch. It's been very successful in the United States. More and more states are seeing that and regulating. And for us, it's about fan engagement. It's a great way to get fans to engage in the game more. And you see that whether it's social gaming, you see it with fantasy sports, and this is now an extension. And I think the time is right, and we hope the bill will get passed, and we're excited.
Yeah, and I think on the sports betting topic, and Scott, I apologize if I get the timing wrong, but I think it was 2014 when your commissioner, when Adam Silver penned the op-ed in the New York Times, coming out in favor of sports betting. I mean, it feels like the NBA has very much been at the forefront of this move. What has it been about sports betting, both in the States and hopefully in Canada, that that has garnered support from you, from your colleagues at the NBA?
Yeah, listen, it's exactly right. In the early '90s, the NBA was actually proponents of PASPA, the federal prohibition that existed in the U.S. And as Tyler mentioned, protecting the integrity of our game is the most important thing. And in 1992, we felt the right thing to do was to have a prohibition on sports and sports betting. But of course, what we saw happen was that as the internet came along and the smartphone came along, it just became so easy to bet on sports illegally. And that is the situation we found ourselves in 2014. And I think that's largely the situation we find ourselves in Canada now, which is that the limitation on it be parlay only is just serving to push all of the betting underground. And there are offshore companies right now taking bets from Canadian citizens all over the country. And if we actually want to protect the integrity of our competitions, we're in a much better position to do that in a regulated environment where there's transparency, where we have access to information, where we can work together with regulators and operators to monitor betting patterns, and to really work together on this. And unfortunately, the prohibition doesn't work. It just serves to push everything into the offshore market. And that was why we changed our position in 2014 and really started the conversation in the US, and we certainly feel the same way in Canada.
No, that's great. Thanks for the kind of the overall view on this, fellas. And I think that as we all know, and as a lot of the folks who are watching, listening know, C218's getting pretty close. We've gotten through the Senate committee. We're going to be up for a final reading. And there's only a couple areas of contention that have been brought up. And I think the one that I think would be most interesting for us to talk about and to deal with is the idea of match fixing. Now, Keith, how concerned are you and the NHL about the impact of match fixing when sports gambling is actually regulated and legalized in Canada? Do you think that how do you guys view the match fixing dilemma when it comes to the current state of sports gambling and then the eventual regulation of it?
First and foremost, integrity is paramount, not just for the sports properties, but for the bookmakers themselves. Without legitimacy, they have nothing. And consumer confidence is the most important thing when someone is betting, which is why Scott was talking about the legalized market, the regulated market, actually will enable us to make sure that that doesn't happen. But recently, in front of Parliament, the Committee on Ethics in Sports documented the fact that match fixing is not prevalent in major professional sports, especially team sports, where athletes are making millions of dollars, right? The concern they have is really in amateur sports. It's in single participation sports. So, I don't want to say we're not concerned about it, because you always want to be concerned about it, because the integrity on the field of play is the most important thing that any sports property has. And we need to maintain that. And we all take extreme lengths to make sure that happens on our own without any of this. Integrity, we all have integrity monitoring services, whether that's with Sport Radar or other companies like that. So we take it very seriously. but we're not concerned that it's going to happen, at least in our sport. And I think that is certainly something that needs to be looked at. But I am more concerned about responsible gaming and all of us taking on that responsibility to make sure that if we are going to legalize that we do have responsible gaming and using the power that we all have as a voice to make sure that people are gaming responsibly. But as far as match fixing and things like that, that is not something that will happen in our sport.
I mean, Tyler and Scott, do you guys have anything else to add on the on the concern around match fixing? Obviously, Scott, there's been some history around that with the NBA. You guys have obviously been sports betting has been live in the States recently, so you might have some direct input there. Anything to add to what Keith said on match fixing?
Sure. Well, listen, to Keith's point, our research supports that the majority of issues that we've seen in sport with match fixing are at the lower levels of competition, and that the major professional leagues where the compensation is substantial, we believe there are fewer concerns. But the fact remains that if there is going to be an issue, we're in a much better position to prevent it and police it in a regulated market. And to the point, yes, there were issues in the past, and that actually informed the changing position. Is that incident was happening, underground, offshore, illegal betting, and in a regulated market where you have transparency into the information, you can prevent and detect that type of behavior. So I agree with Keith on both points. We think it's unlikely that we'll see it in our league, but if it were to happen, we'd be in a much better place to protect against it in a regulated market where you have that transparency, you have that access to information. If it's happening offshore, unregulated, unmonitored, it's going to be much harder to find and prevent.
Totally. I mean, Tyler, I imagine you probably concur with Scott and Keith. Anything else you want to add on this this pretty much one kind of contentious issue that folks have been talking about in Canada?
The guys captured it well. I think it's important we all work closely with the different regulatory bodies. I do think having an open market that's regulated, it brings more key stakeholders into an environment where there's just more resources. Whether you look at alcohol or cannabis or other industries, the more experts that you have, the more attention that you have in a regulated environment, I think there'll be more money put into the right educational programs. We do education with our referees. We have programs in place. We plan to expand that program, no different than other pro sports leagues. And again, the major leagues have a responsibility to make sure that they work closely with the provincial and regulatory bodies to help educate consumers and hold those that are responsible, that are perhaps hiding in the shadows. And again, I can't reinforce why a regulated environment is much better in terms of your specific question around match fixing.
Yeah, and there's something that your commissioner, that the commissioner in the CFL mentioned in his testimony to the Senate that I thought was pretty interesting. And I'm wondering if you can kind of maybe add a little bit more color to this. And I'm curious how the NHL and the NBA see this as well. But Randy mentioned that there's actually guidelines within the CFL kind of internal policies prohibiting players, or there being specific penalties to any players or team officials who participate in any sort of match fixing or any sort of nefarious activity. Is that can you add maybe a little bit of color on what your commissioner mentioned in that testimony?
I suspect it's very similar. It hasn't been talked about. We prohibit our players, coaches, officials from betting on CFL games. We see that communication every year. We do annual education with our referees, and we continue to expand on that. So I suspect the NBA and the NHL and other leagues have serious rules in place to prevent this, knowing that sports betting isn't new necessarily. And to Keith's point, sports betting has been happening. You have to pick three or more games, right? So it's because that activity is already in play. it's much more difficult versus a single outcome. But I'm not surprised that certainly other leagues, and definitely for the CFL, we've always taken this seriously. And now with the right resources, we can enhance our educational programs and prevent that from happening even further.
So I guess it would be a natural, and fellas, you can by all means disagree, but the simple fact is the passing of C218 will actually make the idea of match fixing more challenging than it currently is today, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Great.
And I
Okay.
would say there's a number of amazing companies, technology companies, some of the data providers out there have amazing integrity services. So again, there's with an industry that has an economic value, which the numbers we've seen in the billions, that's going to attract a lot of commerce and a lot of companies that are going to specialize in focusing in and eliminating match fixing. I think with AI and the algorithms now used, there's going to be the cameras that are being developed are going to be able to pick up on some of these nuances that perhaps we haven't seen before. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
That's
Yeah,
great.
listen, I go back to it's happening now, right? But people are betting on sports, on single games throughout Canada. They're just doing it illegally, where we have no access to information and no transparency into what's happening. And yes, I feel strongly that we are in a better position to protect the integrity of our games in a regulated market with transparency and access to information.
Yeah, and in the spirit of keeping things moving, because we're going to aim to wrap around 5 to the hour, because there is a virtual reception following this event that we're hoping that a lot of the attendees will go to. So in the nature of moving it along, I'm going to throw out a question, Keith, and I'm curious to know what you all think as well. More on the business side, I'm hoping you guys can shine a little light on, like, what is the actual benefit of operators becoming official sports betting partners of the leagues? Like, we see that happening all the time in the space, but I'm just kind of curious if you would be able to give the audience a little bit of insight in, like, what are the benefits of an operator becoming an official partner, as an example, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, Keith?
So, like any company that wants to associate with a team or a property or entertainment, whatever it may be, it's about authenticity. It's about the ability to use intellectual property and other assets that a rights holder has, so that they can provide various benefits to consumers. I think in the sports betting case specifically, number one, it is the use of the IP, so that there's confidence that it is an approved partner of the sports property, right? An authorized gaming operator, or whatever each league calls their partnerships. So that's one. Two, all the data that the leagues have is extremely valuable to these sports betting operators, and it's the official data. And that's what really is important. That's what really matters. And that's what all of us are developing. Technologies like we are, puck and player tracking, which you'll be able to determine how fast the puck's going, how fast the player is moving, how long they're skating. All of those types of opportunities can only be secured by the league. And that provides the authenticity that these sports betting operators want. And what's been great is the operators are really working together. It's one of the unique categories where we all, for the most part, are selling non-exclusive partnerships. The NBA, the NHL, we have, a significant number of partners that all take advantage in different ways, but they all want to be authentic and be able to make sure that they can share with confidence, consumer confidence, that they are partners with the league, so that when you are wagering, that it's legitimate. Going back to we talked before about a regulated market versus an unregulated market. So that's really what the opportunity is. And for the leagues, while there is, of course, a revenue benefit, it pales in comparison to the majority of revenue streams like ticketing and television, local and national. It really is about the fan engagement. That's what we see when people do anything involved in a sport, wagering, socially, fantasy, daily fantasy. They're more likely to be engaged. They're more likely to watch. They're more likely to look at highlights. that, buy merchandise, go to games. That's what we want ultimately, and that's what's exciting for us. And as we start getting into the area of more and more, they call, so-called prop bets, things like that. That's lacking certainly in our sport, right? You see it all the time with the NFL and Super Bowl. We don't have that. So most people are betting on NHL, who's going to win the game and how many goals are going to be scored. Well, we want much more than that. We want people to look at, oh, there's going to be a power play. Who's going to score the next power play, right? In real time, and to be able to offer that. And will there be a 100-mile-an-hour slap shot? All of those things will provide more fan engagement, which ultimately is the most valuable commodity that we have.
And I guess, I mean, and Scott, I mean, I have a harder question for you after Tyler. But Scott, how do you see the trickle down effect from the legalization of single event sports betting in Canada going through? I mean, obviously there's only one Canadian franchise in the NBA, but do you see there being a net positive effect for basketball in general in Canada with the passing of C218 and the additional revenues that are going to get flowed into not only the NBA Canada and the Raptors, but trickling down into the the development league and some of the other as an example, and some of the other smaller, more grassroots basketball initiatives in this country?
Sure. Well, first I would say we're supportive of betting on the NBA and the WNBA, but for our developmental leagues and for youth competitions, of course, we don't think betting on those is appropriate. But look, what I would say is, I think Keith put it really well, which is that there is a terrific fan engagement opportunity here, and that we know that fans that bet on sports, that play fantasy, they watch more games for longer periods of time because they are interested in things beyond just the outcomes of games. We might have a game. We've had a couple this week that the outcome really wasn't in doubt. Roughly halfway through the game, and betting is a mechanism to keep fans engaged. Interested in things that are happening on the court other than who is going to win the game. How many points are different players going to score? What's the margin of victory going to be? What are the total amounts of points scored? Who's going to hit the longest three-pointer? There are elements of the game that become interesting other than just the binary outcome of who's going to win and who's going to lose. So it is a tool to engage our fans more deeply in our game, and also to get them to care about games that maybe they otherwise would not have cared about. You might have somebody who's a fan of the Knicks, and they like to watch Lakers Warriors as well, but now they're watching some of the other games that maybe they wouldn't have had a rooting interest in and they weren't as interested in, but as a result of a bet they placed or a fantasy game that a fantasy player on their team, they're now interested in those games and watching those games. So I do think there is a real fan engagement opportunity, and it does increase the interest in your league. And when done appropriately, when regulated and monitored and done as part of a partnership rather than in the underground, it can be a really complementary part of engaging with our sport.
No, thanks, Scott. Now, Tyler, being the only, truly identifiably Canadian league kind of represented on this panel, would it be an understatement to say that the passing of C218 would be an extraordinarily important thing for the league itself to kind of grow the sport within Canada? Like, do you see the passing of C218 as more than just single event sports betting being legalized in Canada? Do you see it as a potentially kind of escalating event for the growth of Canadian football in this country?
It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure if you're referring to the participatory levels of football, but I'm not going to go there because I think that that's something totally separate as sport betting. I would echo what Keith and Scott have shared in terms of increasing just consumption. I mean, we have avid fans, and we know we have a section of our avid fans that when they consume more of the Canadian Football League, whether it's one team, five teams, anytime you give them new ways to engage with us, that's good for us. That's good for us. It's good for our teams. It's good for any business. You're just increasing touch points. You're increasing the lifetime value. It creates economic value across your broadcast partner. When you've got fans watching more minutes, you if you have more fans watching more minutes, there's other opportunities to increase sponsorships, merchandise. We know with the and the good news, for Canadians anyway, we have the good fortune of watching our American friends go first, and we get to sit back and understand sort of what's happening state by state, how they're maximizing, how they're doing sponsorships, how they're working with their broadcast partners. I think the in-stadium betting opportunities, you're seeing what's happening in Washington with the sports book. Those are incredible opportunities for our stadiums, our teams, our team stadiums that have utility more than their 9 home games. I think in general, the more that we can serve our fans, and I think we're moving to a really hyper segmented environment in general. It's really one-to-one, right? So I think this just gives us another way to us engage. And I would say for us as a league, we're interested in growing the game outside of Canada. I'm talking to two of our friends in the U.S., the NHL obviously being, a major player in Canada, and the NBA having one team. But the CFL is in the business of football. And in the U.S., football is number one. So we think there's an interesting opportunity to reintroduce the CFL, which is a little bit different. It's a quicker game. It's got different types of plays, and it also, the lead changes are changing quite often. Most games are decided within the last 3 minutes. We think pairing sport betting with reintroducing the CFL in a hyper segmented way creates new opportunity for us. So we're excited in Canada. We're also excited to introduce the league to others around the world and we think sports betting is a catalyst to do that. So it's a sort of a roundabout way of answering your question, Nick, but I think in general, look, the more eyes that we have on the CFL, the better for us, and the more that our teams are able to capture that value, the more that we can reinvest in the community and by extension grow the game of football in Canada.
No, and I think we can all agree that sports betting and the legalization of single event sports betting in Canada is going to have a significant positive effect on the engagement level that the fans can have. Mike, and we also, let's face it, it's going to also add a lot of revenue, onto the table of both the leagues and the teams. So, and Scott, I'm going to ask you I'm going to lead this off to you. I mean, how do you balance the desire to drive revenues with sports betting activations and partnerships with the desire to appeal to the younger fans, right? We all want to engage that next generation of passionate fan. So knowing that, the legalized, gambling won't be legal for a lot of the younger fans, how do you balance that desire of generating the revenues and the engagement from a older fan perspective to that want to build the sport from the youth up?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It's something we've spent a lot of time on. We know that a lot of our fans are using betting as a mechanism to engage with our sport, but we also know that a lot of our fans are not interested in using betting as a mechanism to engage with our sport. And so the way we have been thinking about it is that sports betting should be a pull versus a push, or it should be an opt-in experience. And we have been trying to design a lot of the integrations and activations with our partners with that in mind. So, for example, we have an alternate telecast called NBA Bet Stream, where in our League Pass product and in our NBA TV app, you can watch a betting-focused version of our game. So if you want to hear betting commentary and hear what the live odds are throughout the game and see graphics that are specifically about betting, you can opt to watch that version of the telecast. And ESPN did one recently. A number of our regional sports networks have done betcasts. And it's a really great way to engage the fan that wants to consume that way, but you're not, replacing Jeff Van Gundy with, somebody who is talking exclusively about betting in the primary telecast. So we think things like that, and we also recently just announced the creation of NBA Bet, which is a content initiative where we have an NBA Bet handle on Twitter and on Instagram and our social feeds. We have an NBA Bet page on NBA.com, and we're not sure that we should have betting content every day on our NBA handles, where a lot of those followers are kids, or maybe in countries or states where sports betting isn't legal. But we have a dedicated handle where if the fans that want to follow that want that content, have the opportunity to do it. So we're looking for those opportunities to allow fans to opt in, to raise their hand and say, this is the type of content I want these integrations, and then serve them to them directly.
Keith, do you have anything to add to Scott's take? I mean, obviously in Canada, hockey from a youth perspective is king. You know, are there have there been any things that you've seen in the States as gambling's been rolling out as far as balancing that line of driving revenue, but also appealing to that younger fan without being too heavy-handed around gambling?
Yeah, I don't think we focus at all on the revenue side as it relates to just the bifurcation, if you will, of the audience. I think what betting has done, and Tyler hit it upon a little bit, is we've all the sports properties have really been focused on technology even before sports betting, the arena of the future, 5G, all of those things. But sports betting has really escalated that for everybody because we want the in-arena experience to be as exciting as you would sitting at home, right? We want people at the live event, and that continues to be extremely important. So, I think that, there's, the onus is upon us. It's upon the sports betting operators. I mean, we're not interested in pushing sports betting and teaching kids odds and all these things, before the proper age or whatever the legal age may be. And I think we all need to continue to provide programs for youth to get them interested and excited in the sport. Technology, especially to today's millennials, is extremely important. So, for us, puck and player tracking, which will allow our young fans to see the speed of the game, allow broadcasters to tell more stories. Everyone gets really excited about the 100-mile-an-hour pitch. Well, guys are taking 100-mile slap shots. People are going down and trying to block them, and goalies are trying to save them. Those are the stories that we need to tell that we think will be exciting. And we can tell those stories to the younger fans without a betting spin. And as Scott talked about, that's just as exciting to then tell it to the right audience for a betting spin as well.
Totally. Now we only have another 4 or 5 minutes, and I do want to make sure that the audience has some time to ask some questions before we have to wrap. So I did get one question from the audience, and it's a little bit specific. The question from Catherine, she was asking what the mechanisms are that are used to prevent the insiders from betting. Now, obviously I can answer from the operator side, but really just to throw it out there, do you guys currently share the lists of players and team officials with the operators when they request it, so those operators kind of have an ongoing database of the folks that they want to pay attention to? Scott, do you want to take us out?
Yeah. The answer is yes, we do. One of the reasons we wanted to have individual relationships with all of the operators is to do things like this. So yes, we do provide them a list of all of our league employees and their information so they can make sure to flag them as not eligible to bet. So yes, that is one thing we do. And we also do a tremendous amount of education and training of our employees, teaching them not only, of course, you're prohibited from betting, you're prohibited from doing this, but also, to make sure they're thinking about, people who may be looking for information and you may not be thinking about it, a trainer who, is working on someone to make sure that they're not sharing injury information with anyone. There is a lot of training and enforcement that we are able to do to educate our players, our coaches, and staff at both league and teams that listen, they have access to information that can't be shared, and they're prohibited from betting. There's a lot, every year you have to take gambling training again, and there's questions and documentation. So we do a lot in the training and enforcement world. And yes, we do share lists of those people so operators can block them directly.
No, and I think that what I really appreciate, all three of you, and I think we're going to have to wrap in a minute, but I think that what I really appreciated hearing from you guys directly is that when people think about C218 and people think about sports gambling being regulated, a lot of the times they just think about the revenue, right? They just think about the money. And sometimes they think about the jobs. But what each of you have harped on and brought to light is how important those consumer protections and the education that comes in line with a regulated market, how important that is for the health of the sport and the health of the industry as a whole. So, I mean, I think that, guys, I don't want to speak for the entire audience, but I'm going to. Thank you so much for your time. I think, unfortunately, we do have to wrap. And I just wanted to remind all of the attendees that there is a virtual reception following this event. So hopefully we'll all be able to see you there. But Tyler, Keith, Scott, guys, it was a real pleasure having this conversation with you, and thank you so much for the passion and the energy around the positivity that C218 could bring both to your leagues, but also to the kind of the sport landscape in Canada en masse. So thank you, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Take care.